Chapter 11 Goldman Envy. Goldman Sachs went public on May 4, 1999, ended a year's partnership and ushered into the new era. His shareholders to answer to a board of directors to provide oversight, and chief executive policy officer instead of the senior partner. Even a time when internet IPOs were at the race Goldman public offering stalled out. The stock was priced a share with open and the opening was delayed and however because the demand was so strong. By days, and it stood a share giving a market valuation on the 3.6 billion. The company raised in the offering made it in the second largest IPO ever. The average taker for the former and current partner who owned most of Goldman stock was million senior partners turned CEO George Corsin, who shared that were suddenly worth had paused who would become CEOs within days in the IPO was stayed to worth one Wall Street competitor to Business Week to had priced this boost paper and non-technology stock is incredible. That the author Goldman IPO must have seemed like a no-brainer, but people connect to the fair new. Chuck the act and going public had been to the culmination of the long struggle that they had left many scared. It's early in 1986, Bob Rubin and Steve Friedman, who were still co-heads of the fights in the accounting department, but were already pushing hard to reshape the Goldman culture. Flow to the idea and IPO is going nowhere. Over the next 5 or 6 weeks, the subject would occasionally bubbled up, sometimes in a small discussion, sometimes at farewell meetings, for the resistance to a IPO from to the majority of the partners. Reminding strong, some fear it would destroy what made Goldman special. Some worried that it would be disadvantaged compared to the other partners who had larger stakes. Some did want to see Goldman's financial and their compensation prior to the new papers. In truth, however, Goldman badly needed to go public. Merrill Lynch, Lehman, and Morgan Stanley were already public companies, as were most other big Wall Street firms. Publicly held banks like Citibank and JP Morgan were Goldman competitors. Transformational deals were taking place to the worst reshaping Wall Street, and those deals used stock currency. Wall Street firms to the went public suddenly had what Charles Ellis, the Goldman historian, called substantial permanent capital. They could take more risks. They could grow more rapidly. They were no longer reliant to the partner's capital. Firms that didn't go public would, in a livelihood, be left behind. When Corson became senior partner in 1994, he made it his mission to persuade to his partner about the necessity of an IPO, and this success. The deal was originally supposed to happen in the following 1998, but had to be postponed embarrassingly when Goldman got caught in the Russian crisis and the collapse on long-term capital management. Even when the IPO finally took place to the following spring, it was not without internal turmoil. Shortly before it finally went off, Corsin White House in a police coup replaced by Paulson and Joe Whitehead. He won the famous 14 business principles, wrote an anxious letter and the Goldman partner. I don't find anyone when denies that decision, and the many of the partners, particularly the younger men, was based more on the dazzling amounts to be deposited in their capital accounts than on what they feel would be good for the future of Goldman Sachs. A friend where senior partner used to say, trees don't grow to the sky, began stand to talk about aggressive goals from the return on equity, the trading side on the firm, for which substantial permanent capital was his livelihood, eventually overwhelmed to the investment banking side in terms of profit stature on autos. And starting in the early 2000s, Goldman, having adjusted to life a public company, and having transformed into a money machine, went on a run, the like of which has rarely been seen in the annals of corporate America. Went on a run the likes of which he's rarely been seen in the annals of corporate America. In the 1903 revenues were 60 billion. They rose to 21 billion in the 2004, 25 billion in 2005, nearly 38 billion in the 2006, more than the double what it had been just 3 years before. Its market cap that year topped at 88 billion. Somehow, Goldman always seemed to be a sweet spot every market. Somehow, Goldman always seemed to react to big market shifts faster than anyone else. Somehow, Goldman never seemed to make a wrong move. But nobody could quite say how, as Goldman began generating most of the revenue from trading. It's become impossible for outsiders to see how Goldman was making its money. Trading can mean lots of things. It can mean acting a market marker and the trading for one's own account. The rest of the Wall Street watched Goldman metamorphosis with a mixture of envy, frustration, and resentment, but even Goldman's first questioned and criticized the transformation. They also tried seekers in partner God, made Goldman the friend to everyone else to have to keep up with. In the outside world, it looked like they had become like Goldman. They embraced risk-taking and they began to produce outfit profits. And the crisis would show that they weren't like Goldman at all. During the worst weekends in the financial crisis, he negotiated and merged with Bank of America. Hang and underestimated you, said Corsin, according to the Paulson. I didn't know you were such a Dutch guy. In fact, there was a lot about her Paulson that is surprising. He was devout Christian Science, whose worst vice was too many diet cooks. Despite a 9-figure net worth, he invited against conspicuous consultation. He was almost absurdly frugal, and tried he inherited from the father an Illinois Delaware. He and his wife, Wendy, whom he married during his second year in Harvard Business School, were avid conservationists and fanatical bird watchers. As a leader, Paulson was cut from a very different cloth than, said Bob Rubin. He once told his alumni magazine that, I'm not an inspirational leader, I just not. He didn't lead by charm, but by leading people to the why and chicken by asking, why do you think? Rather, he was a force in nature and Menaeman's style was marked by a kind of brutal pragmatism. He preferred mode and relying into action rather to the sitting back. While on the passionless strategizing, he was direct to the foul, utterly lacking to the verbal slickness that something requires at about 6'2", with a bully to the steel middle resembled to the Dartmouth football player. He did what's been, and gradually voiced to boot. Paulson had an aggressiveness about him that made people think he was much bigger than he was, and which could intimidate people into silence. He also an astonishing work ethic. Hank is a heat-seeking missile, says a former Goldman partner. If you say Motorola may do a financing he calls Motorola 7,000 times, he doesn't stop. Always the tall firm banker today Jane had to have something new to offer with each and every call. He hated losing whether he was on the ski slope or trying to land a deal. Into the Nixon administration, he became a partner in 1982, 8 years of first joining to the firm, rising to the big co-head and the firm's investment banking department and the chief operating office before taking over as CEOs in 1999. In investment banker too, Paulson did not try to turn back to the clock. He saw clearly that trading and fixed income were used to the future of the firm. In fact, in the years after Paulson took over, the investment banker who had risen to the top of the firm and were jockeying to the V-posing here apparent, we push aside. They, for instance, left to run to the New York Stock Exchange by the 2003. It was clear the Paulson here apparent was a trader. Lloyd Rhineflame, who ran the fixed income currency and the commodities division. In June of the year, Blankenfeld and the 49 became a Goldman board member. In December, he was named president and the chief operating officer. There is no fear, and for those who want me to go, no hope, he told Fortune in 2004. Blankenfeld had joined Goldman via BVI, its acquisition of G. Aaron, the commodities trading firm, and the Hibbs bootstrapped it from the Browns, who put in himself through Harvard and Harvard Law. Blankenfeld had joined to Aaron as gold salesman in 1981. The same year, Goldman vowed to the firm to the organization couldn't have been more different while Goldman was become a wise surefire. James Aaron was a talk street-savvy, highly entrepreneurial trading shop. The Street Fighters, in the words of Denise Susskind, the former G. Aaron executive who while Blankenfeld it had the classic traders drug a tumble culture. Blankenfeld himself later joked that they had G. Aaron. We didn't have to the word client and the customer. We had counterparties, and this because we didn't know how to spell the word adversary for years. As soon as Goldman acquired to a G. Aaron profit plummeted, despite being to the new firm, Lane played a key role in the rebuilding. He proved that he had a sixth sense about making money and raw ability to manage trading. His power began to grow in 1997. He became to go ahead and Goldman's Tri-Fiat income department, and he rose. As Lane rose, he pushed hard to the complete transformation that they had begun under Robin, and he had accelerated under Paulson. What this meant, broadly speaking, was that Goldman no longer sat on the sidelines dispensing advice. The new Goldman and the center on the action, it had a proprietary trading operation and a large private and equity business. It used its money to invest alongside clients, to get trades done, and sometimes to compete with the clients or trade against them. In the trading business, Goldman wasn't just hiding in his risks. but actively seeking to profit for his own account. In other words, instead of trying to avoid conflict and interested with clients, Goldman embraced that and made money from them. It was an attitude that one competitor in 2004 described as somewhere between mercenary and pragmatic. Hedge fund manager and private equity executives alike complained that why they no longer trust the firm. They did business with Goldman because they had to. The firm was so dominant and so smarter and everything that everyone else do pretty much had no choice. There is a small percentage on the floor trading to the purely proprietary, and there is a small percentage that is purely custom driven. But the great majority of what we do will be driven by trying. With customers where customers ask us to do a transaction or will hedge something for them, and then we may hold a position for a while or we may lay enough peace on the market. It's very hard to break out. What's the propriety and what is customer? And when Blankfein signed to the Notting Hat chain and the Goldman recognized that his success was due to increasing franchise. Well, that was true in a way too. It was customers that investigated the transaction that put Goldman at the center of action. Goldman may earn to a free firm, they'll make his money by putting his own capital to work as a part of deal or both. It might be on the other side of trading others justify a client. Too often another risk also worries a book, because Goldman took to the other side was where money could be made. The many facets of Goldman involvement might help clients. One at point. Goldman's bankers who met Blankfein began to refer to the front to the house, meaning they were the salespeople for the finished product. Were told they should sell more derivatives, but if banker asked Goldman's foreign exchange desk for a price or a currency swap, neither the banker nor the client had any way of knowing how much profit margin to the trading desk was building. It was the client's client, to whom Goldman owed some sort of responsibility, or was the client now merely at the counterparty? In the news era, Goldman's first duty was to the bottom line, which accrued to the each shareholder. Clients were a means to that end, not an end in and of themselves. Would have been irrelevant, and that one overstatement. It was certainly true that the Goldman would have been a smaller firm, but it was also true that the Goldman single-minded focus on the maximizing profit made to the partner extraordinarily wealthy in 2003. The person made 21.4 million, while Blankfein made 20.1 million in 2004. The man made 29.8 million and 29.5 million respectively. According to the company filings, not very long ago, $1 million payday with considerably sterling year. Now bad news on the 5 million, 10 million, and 19 million were not uncommon, and the more Goldman grew to the stop the Goldman earned. There was one case in which Goldman Sachs didn't change, and this had much to do with its success and the many ways in which it is changed. Goldman Sachs practiced in the risk management, with an unblinking rigor to that everything on Wall Street came close to matching. Not even JP Morgan, which had practically invented modern risk management. The first mod centrally did not take board or any other modern risk model, as gospel and former risk managers say the phrase, the model says so, was potentially and the fearing offense. When it came to the managing risks, Goldman had what can only be called a kind humility. I believe that the model was only good design inputs, in that failing the model had to balance with the informed judgment and the human beings. Goldman understood that the risks couldn't bring rewards, yes, but it could also bring disaster. There were several specific things and the firm did differently that each spirit. Goldman was a sticker for using what's now a market-to-market accounting, meaning that the market is booked every day, and the price which securities trade on the market. CFO said David Pignard raised this discipline on the Goldman Sachs partnership. He'd say, if a trader said there wasn't a price for a particular position, Goldman make forced him to sell a little bit, just to see what's the price. There was no pretending. Goldman carefully monitored to access to cash, which is critical for investment bank, unlikely commercial bank which had government insured deposits, investment and wholesale funded, which basically means they have to constantly raise capital in the market. If the market shut down for an extended period of time, they're dead. That's why Goldman was basically a piggy bank on the for short-term security set aside in the case emergency. We asked how much money under the most adverse condition could disappear on any given day. That was very different from the bar standard for calculating daily loss, but assuming normal markets like the other adverse ones. There were also several questions respect to the Goldman's approach to the risk management. Almost Wall Street firms to the back office made up to the controllers and risk managers and the accountants. It's akin to unmanaged land back office employees to the produce revenue and the priceless, and they were generally treated the line inferior, but at Goldman the organization was called the Federation, and it was powerful. Included a separate group and the controller who independently check radars. Wall Street institution, one with name that most American was far better now to the Goldman Sachs. Their firms was Merrill Lynch. It had been founded in 1914 by an intense ambitious stockbroker named Shirley Merrill, whose notion of how to succeed on the Wall Street was completely different from anyone else at the time. Merrill's idea and the lifelong crusade was to sell stock and bonds to the American middle class. For most in the history, Merrill made his money by bringing Wall Street to the main street. A phrase his founder coined. Merrill Lynch was the thundering heart that was bullish of America. It had brokerage offices all over country and employed and speak some 16,000 brokers. Merrill Car Brokerage Division was a good, solid, profitable business. That was especially true after to the 1982, when the combination of the bull market and the legal change that caused people to begin investing for their own retirement turned tens of millions of middle class American into investors. The primary reason for this was that in 2002, Merrill Lynch elevated its president in Stanley O'Neill to be new CEO. O'Neill had joined the Merrill traded to the junk bond desk in the 1987 when he was 35 proud, intolerant, autism, and quick to take offensive approaches like modern Merrill culture, which he viewed on the floating and the soft, not adequate to the time. He once told a college they wanted to put new emphasis on trading, especially into a business money to private. Stan O'Neill was the kind of the man who could bristle even the comments that were meant to phrase. To his surprising to be never found to the level of African CEO. To his liking, yet he was one to the great American success story in modern business. O'Neill was born into the tiny town Wedowee in eastern Alabama. In our though do not about it was say a friend. A talk town where it was dangerous for a black people to look directly at white people. They lived in housing project until his father established himself to the assembly line working to the Nervi General Motor plant. After high school, O'Neill was accepted into a world study program by the General Motor Institute (GM). Then they hired him and the sheer foreman to the upon his graduation and got him a merit scholarship when he was accepted at Harvard Business School. Although he was currently on the commentary GM, O'Neill took a job at Merrill because he felt that it offered him more opportunity. He had been put in the chair on the young bond desk, were quickly impressed to the top, continued to the had made his way to the leader. As the head on the brokerage division when the Internet Public boards, he lay 1,000 of brokers without asking to the then boss. I noticed on the company that was for turning on the more pure aid and the Merrill culture was accustomed to criticizing to the French low profit margins to the concluded to the root cause and the uncompetitive margin to the abroad structural and cultural. Far from brain for off B O'Neill. Komansky was Prince, the one chicks about Stan. Komansky later to the New Yorker. Thanks to all the jockeying around O'Neillization, the Merrill Lynch gives to intrigue, extremely talked and around intrigue, gained over from his many enemies in the front, but from two of his close allies on the one, Arshad Zakaria, the head of the global markets in the investment and the officer under Komansky, was effectively on the news number 2 till he lay to the leader president. O'Neill had told the board and he didn't feel any need to fight position. Within a matter of months, Patrick began to going behind O'Neill, back to the board, pushing to the board member to insist to the real name of president promoting Zakaria for the job. Stan, I don't understand what you mean by too painful. I'm just disagreeing with you, replied Fleming. I don't think we can have dinner anymore. Say O'Neill, they never did. Hugh Black A. for Merrill in 1987 during the early days for mortgage-backed securities. Merrill Lynch mortgage trader named to the Howard Robbins million of one trade. The loss was big enough to the Merrill stay advice from taking significant liquidity referring to the one point to the biggest retail money market but might break the buck and the potential disaster. O'Neill pushed her to change that. According to the former Merrill executive, he was constantly asking the various decks why they weren't taking on the more risks. Sometimes when he saw the firms were numbered, he would actually get angry. It wasn't high enough, which the tune him into the Merrill was taking the kinds of the risks she never taken he back to the department. They went wanting to hear aggressive to talk while getting rid of those who didn't have the risk appetite he was looking for, and they constantly compared Merrill's performance to Goldman. You didn't want to be stand office, and the day Goldman report earnings, recalls once on the former lieutenant. Everybody on the Wall Street had a big mortgage. The Merrill Lynch included by the time O'Neill became CEO. They were beginning to focus on the underwriting collateralized the obligation. They included less, some percentage, and the prime mortgage. The man who had ultimate authority on the over mortgage days for the Merrill Lynch and the Tuesday, he's a veteran trader named Jeff Control. Had spent his career around mortgage-backed security, while still in the 20s had run mortgage days for the Leroy Neri and Solomon Brothers. Currently, he joined Merrill and the last in the 1918, just a few years after O'Neill oversight his trading desk until the May 1919, when she took over the derivatives business. More important, everyone around was creating CDOs and fast and they called. Crontal was down, heated, and the fixed income. Sting was constantly prodding him about why weren't making a much in fixed income on Lehman Goldman, says former Merrill executives and the new businessman Kim Pusey Crontal. From below, meanwhile, Control was trying to keep CDO 210 under control. That was no small task. In the turn we hit it in the Chris Ricciardi, an hour-30 for an old trader, a decade before Wild Prudential Securities. Richard had been a part of the group that had first come up to the idea of building mortgage into a CDO. After successful listing of production and their credit twist, Ricciardo and most his team joined Merrill Lynch in July 2003, where he quickly ramped up. Ricciardo worriedly. He was dangerous, said one former trader. He didn't care about roles. If one of the managers didn't give him the answer he wanted, he sued on another manager. Ricciardi and his team picked up the firms that would manage to assemble to the CDOs on the day being created to the investors who bought to the tranches. They had been justification based on the overflow laid out to the Merrill CDO tranche, where Ricciardi was also known about pitching the smaller fry according to the Wall Street Journal. Merrill distributes some on the risky CDOs, slides through and the global network on the wealthy private clients. Salesmen described to the merits on the CDO, investing to the doctors, hedge fund managers, and businessmen. Merrill's risk managers, meanwhile, would call regular meetings to try a figure on who Ricciardi was selling his CDOs to and whether the buyer was truly a property investor. Finally, Ricciardi was in the bargain and the practice on the rebundling to the Triple B mezzanine portion. and the CDOs into the new CDOs. The wood triple Bs they turned on into triple A tranches, which were much easier to solve. Richard could find someone to buy any piece of ship size of former Mary executes. Frontal didn't have any moral objection to the CDO business. Nobody on Wall Street did, but on the hand in the business, he was keen to make as sure to the Merrill instead wasn't warehousing too many CDO tranches. For instance, he imposed a $1 billion limited on AAA tranches that could be held in investment and very on books, largely because on the contact caution by the spring on the 2006, Merrill had around $5 billion or contact caution by the spring, as $6 billion in total exposure to the CDO with the mortgage-backed tranches. For the most push consistent security Merrill was warehousing will today be bundled to the new CDOs. It was hardly a small number, but it was manageable and didn't put in the first 10 rigs. In Com products, we need to continue our ability to take risks and the manufactured products, he said. By then Frontal was beginning to fear mortgage market was the become overhead. He was starting with a new field, otherwise they want more people like Ricciardi, and fewer that they want to buy a mortgage originator just like Lehman and some the other things that they wanted to arrange it for to bring receive your talent. Frontal took an hour was getting late and Merrill would be better served pulling back. On the offside, Frontal and his team gave a serious presentation, outlining the risks and the possibilities. His Merrill Fari's fixed income decks. Frontal had been Merrill Hyatt's non-executive employee with a bonus of more than $20 million. Then someone attachment to the profit Hyatt's were making at Merrill. To the board that day, Frontal and his team were protected the Ravagers. This season, Hans who knew who to make risks 6 weeks later, their will are fired.